Hi, I'm Marnie Schmidt, and I'm a real believer in operational excellence and quality. My mission is to help people like you build quality systems that will achieve better quality and a better customer experience, so you'll be a believer too. In this series, I am breaking down ISO 9001, all the requirements line by line, and translating them and sort of interpreting them so that they're a little bit easier to understand. Let's start in element 7. I've broken this into some areas that, where I really feel like certain things belong together and other things kind of split off and they're kind of a different thought. So I like to audit my sections in the same way that I'm breaking this video apart. So in the first part, we're going to start with element 7, which is all the support things. Now, up until now, we had identified just the overall structure of our management system. Then we talked a little bit about leadership and what their responsibilities and roles will be and what their expectations and all the things that they need to do, including planning. And now we need to talk about just the support functions. We're still not to making products or services. We are not talking about purchasing or procurement or sales or any of those things yet. We're still planning. So we're still planning, we're resourcing, we're putting in the support functions. That is kind of like the whole quality effort. I really like to coach quality professionals to understand that everything that we do should be a support to the business and make sure that we are a support center. We're a service center toward the organization. We should position ourselves that way. We need to absolutely market ourselves that way. Yes, quality people need to market. We need to make sure everyone understands that we're doing all the things that we're doing as a service and as a support. So starting with section 7 and support, we're going to talk about resources first. Now, in every video, I give you one good reason to trust me. And in this case, the reason is I have been a business owner I was a managing partner of a steel service center in Detroit. I know about having to figure out what kind of resources are needed, how we're going to provide those resources. And so let's get into some of the support and resource functions that are in the ISO 9001 standard. 7.1.1, General. The organization shall determine and provide the resources needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the quality management system. So the organization shall determine and provide whatever resources we think we're going to need for this management system. The organization shall consider two things. A, the capabilities of and constraints on existing internal resources. So we need to know what kind of resources we're working with, what their capabilities are, and what our restraints might be. And B, what needs to be obtained from external providers. So we know what we've got to work with internally. What do we need from the outside? Where do we need extra help? We need to make sure that we determine all of those things to make sure that we have established, we can implement and maintain and continually improve this management system. Moving on to people, this is 7.1.2. This is where it gets a little bit weird. It kind of jumps around. It goes people, and then you think, oh, training. Okay, maybe we're going to talk about that. We're not quite there yet. It's just evaluating. Well, we'll just get to it. The organization shall determine and provide the persons necessary for the effective implementation of its quality management system and for the operation and control of its processes. So once we decide what kind of resources we have internally, and what kind of resources we need to get from the outside. Now we need to talk specifically about personnel and about people. And that's really all it says in this particular section. It goes down to talk more about that later, but here it just says, got to identify what kind of people you need. Okay, so there it is, 7.1.2. The organization shall determine and provide the persons necessary to make sure that the management system is effectively implemented, as well as the operation and control of processes. So we've got to have people in place to do that. Moving on to infrastructure. So we've got just general requirements that we know what we've got to work with. We know what kind of people we need, and now we're going to go for infrastructure. The organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the infrastructure necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. So as an organization, again, remember, this is still on management. This is not even at operations or quality yet. It is, what do we need? What kind of resources do we need? What kind of infrastructure? What kind of building? What kind of equipment? And then it goes on to give you some things. This is a note. Infrastructure can include, so it's giving you a whole list of stuff that kind of starting with what I just said. A, buildings and associated utilities. Got to have a place to do our business. B, equipment, including hardware and software. So what kind of equipment do we need? C, transportation resources. Okay, what do we need to move things around, to get stuff here, get stuff out in amongst the building? What do we need for that? And D, information and communications technology. So what do we need in terms of email and phones and whatever? Do we need a computer system, information management system? And now once we got all that figured out in terms of resources and infrastructure, we move on to 7.1.4, environment for the operation of processes. The organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. Now, I said once before about how quality nerds go crazy about certain things. This is one of those things that the quality world went bananas about also. So the sentence with the requirement just says, the organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. That seems simple enough. We need to make sure we have to determine, provide, and maintain some sort of environment that will work. Now, it can mean literal environment like humidity or temperature if you need a temperature controlled thing. But they put this note here, and this, like, I'm just going to read it to you. Note, a suitable environment can be a combination of human and physical factors, such as A, social, for example, non-discriminatory, calm, non-confrontational. Okay, so are we in this ISO 9000 requirement? People read that to say, wait a minute, so non-discriminatory, that's regulatory, obviously, but calm and non-confrontational, how are you going to audit me on that? And then it goes on, and there's another note. B is psychological. For example, stress reducing, burnout prevention, emotionally protective. I am all for these things. Of course I am. In my own business, these are important to me. They are values of my company. They are values when I work with clients. I understand the importance of that. But just this kind of got in here, and it really kind of led people to think, oh my gosh, am I going to be having conversations with my outside third-party auditor about this stuff, and how far are they going to go, and who are they to say we're non-confrontational, which is kind of hilarious. But those two notes really got people talking, but that's why it's important to understand the difference between a requirement and a note. This is a note that says it could be any of these things. Just kind of think about it and see what you think. The next is the more traditional C, physical. For example, temperature, heat, humidity, light, airflow, hygiene, noise. All of those things would be the kind of traditionally what we've thought about in the standard as, yeah, we have to provide an environment, a physical environment that's suitable to make sure we get good products and services out of it. And then finally, these factors can differ substantially depending on the products and services provided. So obviously, it would be dependent on your products and services. So it just gives us that carte blanche to say, yeah, just think about all these things and make sure that it's just appropriate to the products and services that you're trying to provide. So that was kind of entertaining. It's actually, the requirement is one sentence, and then there's just a whole lot of other stuff that got a lot of talk, a lot of press, and people got kind of excited. And but anyway, it's just really an environment for operation of processes. We've got to make sure that we maintain that thing, we're aware of that thing. If we take on a new process or a new piece of equipment, we need to make sure we go back and make sure we do have the right environment for that sort of thing. So then that will take us on to 7.1.5, monitoring and measuring resources. So now we've got the people, we've got the equipment, we've got the environment. Now we need to talk about the monitoring and measuring resources, which is a very important part. And this is kind of getting into that traditional, what we think of as the quality departments area. 7.1.5, monitoring and measuring resources. The first section is the general section. 7.1.5.1. The organization shall determine and provide the resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results when monitoring and measuring is used to verify the conformity of products and services to requirements. So obviously we have to have a reliable measuring device or system of devices or some way of measuring our products and services to make sure that they're conforming. The next requirement, the organization shall ensure that the resources provided, A, are suitable for the specific type of monitoring and measurement activities being undertaken, and B, are maintained to ensure their continuing fitness for their purpose. So it's expected that we need a really good, robust measurement system. We need to have the right devices with the right sensitivity, that they're appropriate to be able to measure and find whether things are conforming or non-conforming. It's very important that we design a measuring system that is appropriate, that also our customers would agree with, that if we're trying to meet a statutory or regulatory requirement, that we're measuring it with the device that will give us reliable information. So that's really what this is all about. Is it talking about calibration? Yeah, we're getting there. It's really about your measurement device and how your measurement device and management system and how all of that works. So let's move on to the next bit, which is measurement traceability, 7.1.5.2. When measurement traceability is a requirement or is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results, measuring equipment will be. So this first sentence helps you narrow down, does every single device in my building have to be calibrated and have to be put in some sort of a system and inventoried and looked at some frequency? Well, this is how you know whether or not. First of all, is measurement traceability a requirement by your customer or by a statutory or regulatory body, or is it considered by you to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity? If you had to demonstrate, yeah, no, I know my products or services were conforming, how would you do that? So that's how you know whether or not these requirements apply to that. If it's something that is required by your customer or by regulatory or legal or whatever, or whether you think in order to demonstrate conformity, if that's the case, if a device is used to pass or fail product, obviously it would. Maybe in my past, I worked with skilled tradesmen, and they have their own tools, and a lot of them have their own measuring devices. They have their own calipers and micrometers and things, and they really do not want you messing with that. I mean, especially as part of the management system, calibrating it, getting it out of my toolbox and letting you take care of it, or sending it out to be calibrated, no way, that's mine. Okay, well, as long as it's not measuring conformity, and it's not a requirement by my customer or something else, then we'll say that that's excluded because it's not demonstrating, it's not going to be used to demonstrate the validity or conformance of my products or services, okay? So I hope that helps people define. I know that's something that people struggle with. What has to be part of my calibration or verification system? That's how you know. The next thing is then now when we decide which devices are going to be or which measuring systems are going to be included, they shall be three things. A, calibrated or verified or both at specified intervals or prior to use against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards. When no such standards exist, the basis used for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. So let's break that down. That is a long dang sentence with a lot of stuff in it. So A, everything that we decide needs to be put into this measurement system, control system, needs to A, be calibrated or verified or both. What's the difference? Calibration is actually making an adjustment to something because it's tweaking it in and dialing it in and actually adjusting it. Verifying is it's already correct, and we're just verifying that it's absolutely correct. So that's the difference between the two. We just say calibration because everybody knows what we're talking about, but technically it's only calibration if you actually have to make an adjustment. At specified intervals, so that means we have to decide what that interval is going to be, or prior to use, so that for example, if you send out a piece of equipment, it's very expensive to have it calibrated or verified or whatever it is that you do to it. And then you say, I'm going to do this every month. Well, what if you don't use that piece of equipment, for example? If you say you're going to do it every month, that means you're going to have to send it out and pay or bring somebody in to do it, or even use your own resources to calibrate or verify it. But it gives you the opportunity here, or just prior to use. So if it's something that's used infrequently, or even if it's used frequently, you can calibrate it at use rather than at some frequency. So it's given you both options. So make sure you take advantage of that if it's appropriate in your measurement system. Against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards. So NIST is the most common, NIST. All of your standards that you use to measure something against. If you send something out, if you have companies come in, if you do your own calibration to standards, that means you're going to take a device, measure a known standard. It might be a chemical, it might be a gauge block, it might be a pin, who knows what it is. Whatever it is, if you're going to say, I'm going to tell you that with 100% confidence this measuring device is accurate, here I'll show you, and you put it on a standard and you have it, this should be 1 inch, and it says it's exactly 1 inch. That is a standard, what you're measuring, to tell yourself that your device is accurate. Whatever that standard, where it comes from, if you're going to do your own calibration, you need to make sure you purchase standards, not just from Grainger or from a catalog or from wherever. You need to make sure that they have a traceable certificate that can tell you that that standard is known and it's traceable to NIST. Okay? That's just the typical, applies to like just about everything that you're going to be doing calibration on. If that's not, if an NIST traceable standard does not exist, like for example, I have worked in the lead acid battery and secondary lead smelting businesses, and when you calibrate a piece of equipment to measure the chemistry of a lead sample, there is no international or national standard. There is a standard that is created between the customer's lab and the lab producing the product or the smelter, and that is the standard. And so in the case that that is what you're using and there is no national traceability standard, you shall retain as documented information what that standard is about, where did it come from, and what is it supposed to be, and what is the history of all of that. So your measurement system should include the traceability to NIST or other nationally recognized body, or documented information that explains exactly what it's about. So if there is a nationally or internationally recognized body, that's where it should go to. You can't just defer to, well, I wrote it down. Now, if it exists, you need to make sure that it's traceable to that. If it doesn't exist, then you have to have a formal documentation of exactly where that's coming from. So the next thing is equipment shall be identified in order to determine its status. So every piece of equipment needs to be identified. Now, does that mean that everything has to have a calibration sticker on it? It doesn't mean that. It just means that it has to be identified in order to determine its status. How do we do that? Well, there's lots of ways you can do that. You can put a sticker on it, and it'll tell you this thing has been calibrated and this is when it's due next to be calibrated again. Or you can just have a serial number on it, and you can look it up and you can know, I can identify this instrument, and I know its calibration status based on that. But it has to be identified. And C, safeguarded from adjustments, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status and subsequent measurement results. So the expectation is you have to protect and safeguard your equipment from adjustments. So making sure that if there are tweaking tools, that you take those tweaking tools away so people can't make adjustments to them. With software, it gets a little trickier, so people can't get in there and monkey around with program or code. So the expectation is the organization will protect instrumentation and make sure that it's always valid. And the final requirement, this is kind of funny because I've had this happen to me. The organization shall determine if the validity of previous measurement results has been adversely affected when measuring equipment is found to be unfit for its intended purpose, and shall take appropriate action as necessary. Okay, let's break that one down. So these are how you kind of make decisions about your measurement device management system and your measuring system. The organization, that's me or that's you, shall determine if the validity of previous measurement results has been adversely affected whenever measuring equipment is found to be unfit. So if I have something that is broken, if somebody drops a caliper, I pick it up and it's no longer accurate, what do I do? So when you're deciding how frequent you're going to check your instrumentation, if you're going to think that you're only going to do it once a year, well, just know that if a year from now, when you pick up that instrument and it's wrong, then you're going to have to assess for yourself, what does that mean for everything that I just measured with that device for the past year? Mine was only a month. I had, I can't remember if it was a caliper or a micrometer, doesn't matter, but I really did have this thing where it was not broken, it was just wrong. And I was like, dang, I mean, it was the device used on a particular production line, and it was measuring all the product. So I had to obviously go out and check everything that I had in my warehouse, and thankfully I didn't find anything wrong. I could have left it there, but I really felt like it was more appropriate to contact my customers that had potentially been affected by that and let them know, I found this issue, I just wanted you to know, I'm happy to come and re-measure anything that you have at your plant, at your facility. I mean, you really have to go a long way. If you find out that you've been measuring something with a device that's wrong, it's a terrible thing. You don't want it to happen. So how do we mitigate that? Well, what some people do, and what I did because I learned that lesson, was I got my own little gauge block and I put it so that at every shift, at the start of every shift, people would measure just that one little gauge block. So I did continue my sending these out to be calibrated, but I also had my own little additional thing where at least I was going to know in between frequencies that it was still accurate. And that was just another thing that I could do. So if that ever happened to me again, I'd have one shift worth of product instead of a longer period of time. So that's just a best practice I'll share with you. I encourage you to do such a thing. But that's how measurement traceability kind of works. So if you find that it's out of calibration or unfit for its purpose or it's broken or whatever, then you have to take appropriate action as necessary. You decide what that is, but it really should be somewhere along the lines of making sure all the product that you judge to be good or bad with that instrument is looked at again. That would be one action that would be appropriate for sure as necessary. So that is everything in 7 to 7.1.5.2. There is another section that's just 7.1.6, and I'm stopping. I'm stopping right now, and that's going to be in the next video because it is organizational knowledge. It's nothing like measurement. It's nothing, it's just weird that it's just kind of popped in there. So I'm going to treat that one separate. So that wraps up measurement. Next is organizational knowledge, and until then, keep improving.